tax-paying residents of a local area have fewer rights than migrants who've just arrived here and have no ties to this country. That has now been stated explicitly.
You're right to castigate the terrible people who were responsible for governance over the last 10 years. I mean, some of them shamelessly are trying to reinvent themselves as podcasters and journalists, and they should be held to account. Now, it may be that I'm saying that because, of course, I wasn't invited in order to see JT Vance, who regarded Sydney as somehow some sort of poster girl for white Aryan supremacy.
An Aryan propagandist.
The Leni Riefenstahl of Delhi. I am not a big flag waver. I think that you wave a flag if your national identity is either fragile or under threat. But it's also the case that the new Director of Communications at number 10 is Finbar Saunders with his double entendre.
Yes! Oh, Hassie Jakes would not be happy if you said that in front of her, in her presence. It's one for Matron to deal with, I think. Tony Blair was good at delivery. It's just that what he was delivering was horrific.
Completely. Hello and welcome to Quite Right, the new podcast from The Spectator that searches for sanity and common sense in a world that increasingly seems devoid of both. I'm Michael Gove, editor of The Spectator.
And I'm Madeline Grant, assistant editor at The Spectator. Each week, Michael and I will be talking through some of the stories that most piqued our interest, amusement, or exasperation.
This week, on our first ever podcast.
Who won summer? Was it Farage, Starmer, Tom Skinner, or maybe, just maybe, Sydney Sweeney?
And also this week, Keir Starmer, ever the man of the people, chose transfer deadline day in order to reshuffle his own team. But will it bring him glory?
And with the release of Netflix's Thursday Murder Club, we lament the blight of cosy crime.
So, Maddie, a new political term has started, and with it our new podcast. But inevitably we meet in the shadow of a summer. Now, normally you would expect the summer to be, if not a politics-free zone, at least one where we could switch off to an extent. But there was quite a lot of furious political activity this summer, and most of it seemed to be around borders and the battle for Britain. So Nigel Farage, I think, was the person who had the best of the summer in media terms. I don't know if you felt that it was Farage's summer, or if you felt that actually there were more complex currents than that.
I think on balance I do. It was an interesting summer because in many ways, like, official politics wasn't really taking place. You know, Parliament had ground to a halt. But I think we also saw across politics a kind of almost like a gonzo style output. You know, people going off and making their own videos. Chris Philp on a dinghy, or was he on a boat chasing a dinghy? I think it was the latter. Obviously, Robert Jenrick carried on his videos where he actually went to the asylum hotel. It felt like unofficial politics was over, but people were doing a lot of their own kind of moonlighting in terms of comms.
I think it's absolutely the case that we had a more fractured political and media landscape in which you had a greater degree of entrepreneurship on the part of Tories like Rob Jenrick and Chris Philp, all of whom seem to regard the summer as an opportunity to visit France. Traditional political thing to do, but the untraditional political thing to do was to visit either the jungle in Calais or to go migrant hunting in Dunkirk. Someone pointed out to me that they remembered in 1940 when hundreds of brave young men set off in small boats across the Channel, but it was a slightly different vibe this time round. But the one image of Starmer that I remember over the summer was of him as one of a number of European leaders going as a supplicant to Donald Trump. And overall, I think for the government, this was a great missed opportunity because they have still the potential to be able to wrest the agenda back. But what we had was the Prime Minister as part of a sort of delegation of 7 dwarves going to see the President, and instead the airwaves being filled with people on the street in Essex, Tory shadow cabinet ministers mounting their own sort of guerrilla raid on the migrant camps, and Farage himself almost as the orchestrator of the main themes of the summer, because he's the person who is Trump's proxy in the UK, and more than anything else, he's the person who's delighting in the focus on migration and the failure of the established parties to have dealt with it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think all of the legal challenges to do with Epping and the Home Office, the way that they mounted their campaign against the High Court judgment, that to me was one of the defining moments of the summer, because we now have it basically officially that tax-paying residents of a local area have fewer rights than migrants who've just arrived here and have no ties to this country. That has now been stated explicitly.
The fact that lawyers stated in terms, in black and white, as you say, that the human rights of asylum seekers, their universal human rights, trump the judgment of a local community and its democratic representatives, that is talismanic and not in a good way for the government.
But I do feel that the political mood right now is one of mutiny and rejectionism, which I have a lot of sympathy for, given the way the country's been run for, well over a decade, and is now being run, if possible, even worse under the Labour government than its predecessor. I think we may be, as we saw at the last general election, not enough questions asked of the challenger party, not enough detailed questions, and essentially allowed to coast by on claims that didn't stack up. It was always ridiculous to think that the Labour manifesto could be paid for just by taxing private schools and what was the other one? Non-doms. That basically those were their two big commitments that they were happy to make publicly, and it's obviously turned out to be a massive lie, and the taxes are about to increase again. But that people didn't really start. The press certainly didn't really wake up until they were already in number 10.
No, I think, you're right to castigate the terrible people who were responsible for governance over the last 10 years. I mean, some of them shamelessly are trying to reinvent themselves as podcasters and journalists, and they should be held to account for their many, many errors and mistakes. But
I'm sure you're talking about George Osborne here, Michael, yes.
But, George who? But the one thing that I would say is you're right that the country's in the mood for, I think, a significant shake-up. They voted consistently for change. They felt that change has not been delivered. But the difficulty of delivering change requires a focused, determined effort to understand where the levers of power are and how to move them. And that's why I think that small screw-ups, like the one that Reform had over women in prison, are a warning to it now, to make sure that, not necessarily that they spell out in detail every aspect of where their policies will be enacted, how they'll be enacted, but that they make sure that they're doing the work behind the scenes in order to prepare for the inevitable scrutiny that they will face. And, of course, this weekend we have the Reform Conference in Birmingham, but I suspect, rather than it being a 48-hour policy seminar, it may resemble a very different sort of weekend. You've been to a Reform Conference before, maybe?
I had the distinct pleasure of being at the one last year, which was a great deal of fun. I mean, yes, maybe Reform have some more work to do on the details, but they are the master of the good vibes, I think, in a way that no other party is at the moment, certainly not in Britain. It was, from the start, quite a boozy affair. They were selling special cup holders so that people could carry multiple drinks and still keep their hands free for, I don't know, shaking hands or having a fag. At the end, they had this battle bus on stage where they had obviously the battle bus they'd used during the general election, and they had various Reform supporting celebrities who were in the battle bus waving at the crowd from the upper deck. It was unbelievably camp. And I think the campness, much like it is with Donald Trump, actually, is quite an important aspect of their success. An important aspect of camp is that you don't take yourselves too seriously. Reform does not take itself too seriously, and people like that. And then on the other kind of dramatic extreme away from this, we have Keir Starmer, a man who constantly takes himself seriously and therefore cannot understand why everyone is laughing at him.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that the earnestness of the professional political class and our attachment to jargon and the sometimes patronising tone that we take when challenged about the difficulty of government. I think the country think, to coin a phrase, JFDI, but they also think that a certain amount of, how can one put this, up yours towards the political class is required from an energetic opposition. Now, obviously, reform, we both think, tended to sort of drive the news agenda over the summer. But there were a number of other figures who were also, during our perhaps only temporary break from politics, who populated the airwaves or who stormed into our feeds. And again, J.D. Vance was a convening power this summer. There he was in your home village, playing host to...
It's a town, Michael. It's a town. We have a medieval town charter and we're not afraid to use it.
So Charlbury, in the heart of the beautiful Cotswolds, was J.D. Vance's operating base for a period during the summer, during which we had Tory MPs like Danny Kruger and Katie Lamb. We had Tom Skinner, the celebrity. Well, I'm not quite sure what he is a celebrity.
Okay, I would say that Tom Skinner, the best way to describe him is he's kind of the archetypal Essex man. He's very patriotic. He loves his wife. He loves his kids. And he's often posting videos at the end of the day, telling his followers to have a pint of the golden nectar and go to their local pub and have a great time and enjoy life. So it's kind of sending out these positive messages. And he has been becoming increasingly political on his social media too. And I wonder if it may be whether it's the optimism that first attracted J.D. Vance to Tom Skinner.
So in a sense, he's like an archetype, but authentic. So he's there with his full English, his pint of foaming ale, and his anti-Sadiq Khan talking points, but all of them cohere together in a lovable bish, bash, bosh body.
Yes, that's right. And that is his catchphrase, as you say, bosh. I think you're right. He's a figure of Merry England for sure.
Do you think this was Skinner's summer or Vance's summer?
Well, I think the fact that Tom Skinner was invited is actually, it's funny. I really like the idea of a kind of like archetypal patriotic Essex man going over and speaking to a bunch of very earnest Americans, including J.D. Vance. But the fact that he's even on J.D. Vance's radar is a sign of just how online the vice president is. We're often told, oh, Twitter's not the real world. Sorry, X is not the real world. The fact that the VP is going out of his way to have Tom Skinner along because he's seen one of his videos suggests that potentially it is very much the real world. Was it Vance's hot girl summer? Well, for me, it was very emblematic of the fundamental asymmetry of the special relationship. The fact that in days of yore, you might not have had this many quite high-ranking politicians trooping over to J.D. Vance's summer home, sometimes breaking off their own holidays to go and visit him during his. I think there was perhaps more of a pretense of being equal partners, even though we've not been equal partners for over 100 years, perhaps.
I think you're right that having the American vice president coming here and having people so conspicuously paying court to him did seem like, an imperial legate coming from Rome to some out-of-the-way province. And here you had the native Picts and Celts, wiping off their woad in order to pay tribute to him. Now, it may be that I'm saying that because I wasn't invited in order to see J.D. Vance. But I do wonder sometimes, is it entirely dignified, the approach that we take towards the aura of the White House? But and more also, striking, yes. I think. Sorry, Madeline. I think more striking is, as you say, that J.D. Vance is clearly extremely online. Otherwise, he wouldn't be inviting Tom Skinner to come and see him. And you also get the sense that the way in which he's entered into debate with people like my good friend and fellow gilet wearer Rory Stewart suggests that he is someone who recognises that the debate is no longer conducted in the corridors and the seminar rooms. It is conducted on X, Insta and elsewhere. And it is striking also that one of the big political debates of the summer was not about taxation, the deficit, or Ukraine, but it was about genes. Now, Sydney Sweeney is a brilliant actress. who attracted attention this summer for the ad campaign that she had, in which she was making sure that eyes were drawn towards her clothing. And in particular, her jeans campaign became a site not just of the male gaze, but also of cultural conflict. Because what she was doing, what she was saying, was not just a way of celebrating a great American denim brand. It also became a way of dividing America between those people who, when Sydney celebrated her great jeans, saw this all-American girl who was pushing back against woke, and others who regarded Sydney as somehow some sort of poster girl for white Aryan supremacy.
An Aryan propagandist.
The Leni Riefenstahl of denim.
But I couldn't help noticing that, I don't know, I think a few years ago, potentially that advert wouldn't have been made in the first place, and B, the furore might have been enough to kind of swallow it up. Is it perhaps a sign that we've reached peak woke? We've already passed peak woke a few years ago.
I think it is. I think it is interesting that the cultural moments which attract such political and ideological interest and energy are now all happening online, and increasingly are happening in the world of advertising and influencing. So Sydney Sweeney, advertising jeans, becomes to some an anti-woke epiphany. To others, it's a celebration of Aryan supremacy. It takes me back the other year to the Jaguar ad, where you had a variety of models of indeterminate ethnicity and gender, and the whole point there was they were seeking to celebrate the thrusting V12 power of the Jaguar in a way which almost seemed to invert traditional motor ads, and this was seen not least by Nigel Farage as a disaster, and it did prove a commercial disaster. So I think you are absolutely right that there is a shift away from what might have been thought of as DEI enthroned in the advertising world, to one where the genuinely subversive and creative is old school and anti-woke. But the really striking thing, to my mind, is that these things are significant or symbolic in the way that court masks might have been in the 17th century, or royal portraits in the 18th century. The image drives, the meme drives the debate, rather than the considered long-form article or the groundbreaking speech. And so we have a sort of attention deficit disorder in our politics, as well as a shift essentially away from the progressive to the right.
So the medium is the message?
Increasingly. And, I am crusty and reactionary enough to worry about that trend, but it seems to me inescapable. And it takes us back to one of the points about Farage's success, because my worry is that the Conservative Party is still the party of the long-form article, the thoughtful speech and seminar.
Yeah, the policy exchange monograph. Yeah.
Precisely. As the author of several of them, many of which I think will probably have been cures for, the
insomnia.
The insomnia of thousands. Nevertheless...
I don't know if it had that many readers, Michael.
The insomnia of a score of people. Well, a couple of people.
Sorry, I'm being very mean.
No, you're right. I think that actually that it's memes and vibes which do drive political passions in a way that we haven't seen before. Hence, J.D. Vance recognising the importance of Tom Skinner. Hence, Bosh becoming even more significant than Ich bin ein Berliner or Blood, Sweat, Toil and Tears. And also, I think that's why the Reform Conference, as you alluded to earlier, with the sense that it generates of fun and subversion, may have a bigger impact than some of the lengthier orations that we'll see elsewhere in coming weeks. But I do want to, before we leave the summer, just ask you about one of the phenomena of the summer, which was undoubtedly something that was Farage adjacent and reform inflected, which was raise the colours. So we saw over the summer the apparently spontaneous upsurge of Union Jack and St George's Cross flag waving. We saw people repainting Pelican Crossings with the colours of the St George's flag. And we had various politicians clambering not just to wrap themselves in the flag, but to raise it in their neighbourhood and to bedeck their homes with it. What was your sense about where this had come from and how significant it was?
Well, initially I wondered if it was quite a limited thing. Obviously, you see lots of it online, but we can never be sure how much of what we're seeing online is a authentic version of events or how much of it is the algorithms. But I have to say, I drove down to Devon maybe a week and a half ago for my sister's wedding, and every single motorway bridge had a flag bedecking it, either a Union Jack or a St George's flag. And I don't, this is definitely coming in a bottom-up way, because it simply wouldn't have that kind of pervasive reach all over the country. Maybe there are parts that, maybe in leafy Surrey there are fewer flags. I don't know, but I was taken aback by the extent of it. What did you think?
Yes, and I think if you drive down the M3, there are flags bedecking many of the bridges. You're absolutely right. But then if you go outside London, essentially, you will see the Union Jack and the St George's Cross flown with increasing frequency and pride. I don't myself go a bundle on this, though. I am not a big flag waver. I think there is something about British identity, and maybe I'm particularly sensitive because I'm a Scot, which I believe is better understated. I think that you wave a flag if your national identity is either fragile or under threat. And I would rather that we had a quiet confidence in our national identity. But I think that the flag waving upsurge is a reaction. It's a reaction to three things. It's a reaction to, one, funnily enough, the near ubiquity of the Palestinian flag in some parts of our country as a symbol of protest, identification with a particular political cause, but also in some parts of our country, a way of almost saying that these areas are seceding from thinking about other issues and putting this conflict and its primacy literally in your face. I think the other thing is that the near or almost semi-compulsory nature of the Pride or Progress flag being waved 1 month a year, sometimes actually 12 months a year, I think has provoked a reaction as well. Not a homophobic reaction, but a reaction against enforced conformity. And I think the third thing is a sense that overall, British and in particular English identity has been thought of as essentially low prestige. And people are saying, well, sod you. I am actually delighted to celebrate being English or British. I think these three things have come together. So I think it's understandable. And it may be that this is just an old-fashioned, perhaps out of place reticence on my part. I find it just a bit too much, and maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm out of date and patronising.
It feels quite American. It does, and traditionally we haven't felt the need to express ourselves in that way. But I think you're right. It does speak to a vulnerability in our sense of national identity. Also, the way that for Englishness, especially, national symbols have been eroded. I mean, for example, my mother told me, and I was very surprised to hear this, that, at the end of every film in a cinema, they would play the national anthem. There were ways to show national allegiance, which now perhaps don't exist so much anymore. But, it is a bit rich for progressives to now be complaining about the national flag and feeling triggered by seeing it in public spaces when, up till now they never met a flag that they didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that it is a powerful reaction. And again, my own instinct is that the Union flag should be flown to celebrate Jubilees, the Queen's birthday, conspicuous successes of the UK on the world stage. The St George's flag should be flown at England football matches and from churches on St George's Day.
All year round,
quite.
From a church.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think in a way, the sense that I have of when it's appropriate to fly a flag is rooted in a past Britain that has been vilified and under attack. Rather than our history being a source of both pride and shame, we've been encouraged to think of it as a chronicle of sin, and therefore what we're seeing are people reclaiming the flag because they think that
including
pride...
Keir Starmer, who
including
says
Keir
that
Starmer, who
he
must come
keeps
to in a
one in
second.
the number 10 flat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it is, as I say, an understandable reaction to that. And it proves a particular point, which is, if you seek to suppress something that is natural, healthy and normal, patriotism, by making people feel that it is somehow shameful and sinful, then far from people accepting that, what you will see is that original spirit recreated in a stronger and less civilized form. So, for those people on the left, like the Labour MP for Norwich South, who've objected to this energetic flag waving, it is the direct consequence of their and their tribe's determined attempt to seek to undermine and to neg patriotism.
I just also find it weird that they pick on the English flag in particular, the St George's flag. Is that just because of kind of EDL associations? Because to me, the bits in British history that they most object to, these people, is what happened under Britain. It's the empire, it's colonialism, it's the expansionist empire, which is, whereas to me, England is much more of a kind of local-based, fairly quiet, humble thing. It often exists in a particular sort of locality. And it's also just extremely old. I mean, the barriers of England are basically exactly what they were under Athelstan.
I think you're absolutely right. I think I'm very attached to the notion of British identity, but it's also the case that for many on the progressive left, Britishness is an easier identity to work with because it can be a portmanteau identity. It's one that comprehends Welshness, Scottishness, and also it seemed to be less ethnically inflected. And that's one of the reasons why there's a particular dislike of the assertion of English identity, because it is deeper and more ancient, and it's also deemed to be, though I hesitate to use the word, it's deemed by its opponents to be somehow whiter. And that's why you've had that fierce energy around the debate of who can or who cannot be determined as English. It's also the case that the St George's flag, its return, it has basically been a phenomenon of the last 30 years or so. I think that broadly the Union Jack was the flag which was flown apart from churches to celebrate significant moments in our national life. But this return of a strong English identity, I think, has been, to some extent, a football thing, but it's far more, as you quite correctly point out, the resistance of people who have seen their identity either belittled or sneered at, or regarded as almost Ramapithican in its primeval prejudice. So this week, Maddie, we've had Keir Starmer launching what he calls phase 2 of his government, with a variety of figures leaving Downing Street and some new recruits for his top team. What do you make of it?
Well, for a start, when I heard that there was to be a reshuffle, my initial thought was, I assume he means ministerial reshuffles. But apart from Darren Jones being sort of poached from Rachel Reeves' team to become Starmer's top dog, chief enforcer, come Thomas Cromwell figure, I don't really know who many of these people are, because frankly, I have a hard enough time working out who all of the new intake are, let alone every single advisor. So it felt like a bit of a damp squib almost from what was leaked in the press. And I wonder, was that a sign that they perhaps planned something more ambitious and have sort of gone back on it? I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts, because you obviously know a lot more about the inner workings of the machine than I do.
Well, I like you, I think, and most people will have looked at this and they will have seen that someone called Olaf Henriksen Bell was out and someone called Torsten Henriksen Bell was up. And they will have thought, what is this? Is Henriksen Bell some type of AI-generated Labour figure. Hey, ditch the Olaf, let's get the Torsten model in. It's an upgrade. There is a sense in which so many of these figures look to the outside world like identikit technocrats who are slotted in to this machine, this web, in order to serve the Starmer bot more effectively. If one takes a couple of steps back, however, I think you are absolutely right that the broader political significance of this is twofold. Firstly, real concern on the part of Starmer and those who are around him about the economy and the recognition that Rachel Reeves isn't working as she should at the moment as Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I think the other thing is the oft-repeated complaint from Labour people that the machinery of government is inherently dysfunctional. And so we've had a recurring sense from Labour people that Dominic Cummings was right, that Whitehall doesn't work, that we really do need to shake things up. But I can't see how these appointments actually resolve those problems, because the people who've been promoted in many cases are those who come from Rachel world. They have the same broad economic outlook as she does, for better or for worse. And also, very few of them, if any, are the type of disruptors required to fundamentally either rewire or rip out the wiring of Whitehall and replace it with the operating system required.
So they are replacing blob-adjacent people with other blob-adjacent people who are likely to continue in a very similar way.
Completely.
Doesn't bode well. Michael, you're in politics for a long time. I've never heard you speak in this kind of like nonsense corporate jargon that they all seem to speak nowadays across politics. There are many such cases in the Conservative Party as well. Who teaches them to speak like this? No one says delivery in daily life. No one speaks of mission boards and resilience and all the other words that they love. Like, where have they all been to the same finishing school or something?
Well, you will have observed it. And I think that it's an example of what some might call a network effect, but what we would all recognise from school, which is that if cool kid A or cool kid B starts using a particular phrase, then the others opt in. And it will have been the case that a long time ago there was someone in the Labour Party who was actually good at delivery, Michael Barber 25 years ago.
Tony Blair was good at delivery. It's just that what he was delivering was horrific.
Completely. But so you will have people who think it's cargo cult politics. They'll think, if I repeat the voodoo incantations of the person who was actually good at, quote, delivery, then somehow, as if by magic, we can deliver.
Are they manifesting? If we want it to be, it will be so.
Exactly.
If we say delivery 3 times, like we get another wish on the magic lamp.
Precisely. And I don't know, because you're watching these guys almost every day, which are the phrases that grate most. For me, the one that absolutely grates most is behaviours with an S.
Oh, they are like learnings. They love learnings, don't they?
They're doing violence to the English language every day. But are there particular ministers who stand out to you as those who have this sort of operating system inserted Borg-like into their brain and who are repeating it all the time?
Because there are so many, I feel mean picking on anyone in particular, but there is a junior minister called Georgia Gould, who is she's actually my local MP in London, who is a real candidate for this. I can't actually understand what she is saying most of the time. Just an interesting choices of words. They don't say begins, it's always commences. I don't know why they do this. Is it to sound a bit more kind of grandiose in what they're doing?
I think there is a preference for the Latin over the Anglo-Saxon, which, as George Orwell pointed out, is always a sign.
And Tolkien.
Exactly. That people are going for the abstract rather than the concrete, and therefore they don't really know what they're talking about. It's also the case, however, that we may be, as well as this trend, also suffering from the ChatGPT-ification of politics. Over the summer, it was observed that the number of speeches in the House of Commons that begin with, "I rise to support," i.e. the most AI-generated introduction, had dramatically risen. And it was also reported that the use of the word hub, which I think is probably even more repugnant than
hub,
behaviours,
yes.
had also risen. Now, some people might think that this is a fogyish aesthetic distaste that you and I are expressing, but it goes to the heart of a failure to think
It's still correct.
originally.
It's still true, though. I don't care if it's folkish. This is gibberish. I found one of Georgia Gould's classic statements from a sketch I did a few months ago. The government, she said, would soon be consulting on a new national procurement statement to set out their expectations around mission delivery and social value. Like, what the hell does that mean?
Nobody knows. And as soon as you use the word around in any sentence, then, particularly if it's teamed with issue or mission or value, then you know that this is a flight from the concrete into the ethereal world of progressive nothingness.
Yes, it is, because actually they often say, I'm going to talk around. Could you talk around that issue, please, Steve? They will say. That in itself is quite telling, because to talk around something implies that you won't ever get to the point. If Steve would talk about something, you'd be much more likely to get some vaguely coherent conclusions. But coherence is not their main aim, I think. And also, if no one can understand what they're saying, it's harder to scrutinise.
Completely.
And keep track of what the hell's going on in Parliament.
It's an evasion. And that's what Monday was about, evading a broader reality. The fact that, as you observed, the most striking image, the most striking presentation on the part of Number 10 was this 1.5-minute video of Keir Starmer talking about phase 2, having the ministers running up the stairs and so on, with nothing profound there. The fact that the process was the story, rather than Keir Starmer taking the opportunity to say, this government is going to generate economic growth, or this government's going to protect our borders, or this government is going to make sure that more absent children are back in school. The fact that there was literally no there reinforces the fact that these identikit figures with their Vatic language are in pursuit of I hesitate to use the word mission or agenda, but in pursuit of a purpose which is absent. And that is the real message of this week. There will be acres of analysis, none better than, of course, in The Spectator, about what the replacement of the malfunctioning Olaf with the Torsten 2.0 Henriksen Bell
Sounds like some
model.
kind of 19th century invention, doesn't it? Like a special combustion invention from Norway.
No, precisely. The whole thing about it is that, you know, is this a new IKEA model? Is this a new AI bot? Or is it, as you say, some piece of Norwegian auto machinery? But yes, you know, the Ericsson Bell factory has recalled the Olaf and is supplying us with a Torsten. And you think, well, that's great, but I'm afraid the software in which it runs is still from the Resolution Foundation. So that means more taxing, more spending, and more borrowing here from Ericsson Bell, TM.
Can I just give you one of my all-time favourite factoids? It has nothing to do with politics, but I thought you might be interested. Do you know what the first thing that Alexander Graham Bell said when the telephone, the kind of prototype telephone was invented? What's the first thing he said down the line? Do you know?
Press 1 if you want to. Talk to customer services. No, what did
I'll give
he
you
say?
a clue. It's a running joke in The Simpsons. If that gives you a clue.
It should, but I'm going to have to give up.
Okay, it's ahoy hoy, which is what Mr. Burns says whenever he answers the telephone in The Simpsons. It's a joke about how Mr. Burns is so old that he goes back to 1879 or whenever the first telephone was. Ahoy hoy.
I will remember that, and I will also say that I think that not only is Montgomery Burns' response to telephone messages pleasingly traditional and antique, if only we had Montgomery Burns having been appointed in the reshuffle to Number 10, you would have at least had someone who was equipped to deliver. Nuclear power in Springfield may well be dangerous, but at least it's generating some energy, which is more than Keir Starmer's capable of.
If only we'd listened to Monty Burns a bit sooner.
But the quote of the week, I think, was the marvellous Sid James Kenneth Williams quote that the government was delivering growth that people can feel in their pockets.
Oh, I could just picture Kenneth Williams' face like, oh.
It is. You know, I suppose because it's not just Carry On, but it's also the case that the new director of communications at Number 10 is Finbar Saunders with his double entendre.
Yes. Oh, Hassie Jakes would not be happy if you said that in front of her, in her presence. It's one for matron to deal with, I think.
No, I'm not. The one thing is that if Reformers Dr. David Ball said that he was going to deliver growth that people can feel in their pockets, I think there would be a run for the exits, but still.
No, it's comedy gold. I would be there. I would stay there. It's amazing. I will not hear a bad word said about Dr. David Bull, who's my hero. Well, one of the big releases, or at least the big streaming releases of the summer, has been the TV adaptation of Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club books, or the first book in the series, which stars Helen Mirren, Pierce Brosnan, Ben Kingsley and Celia Imrie. I'm kind of fascinated by this whole genre because I see more and more of it. I would very much put it firmly within the canon of British twee, which is something that I know the Spectator has had a whole cover story on. Very interested in the kind of the march of Paddington Bear and the Great British Bake Off and, dare I say it, Captain Tom before his daughter turned out to be a massive crook. I sort of think there is this obsession with sort of cosy Englishness, and the Thursday Murder Club's extraordinary success is very much a part of that.
Yes. So The Thursday Murder Club was a hugely successful novel by Richard Osman, who many people will recognise from his role in Pointless. He is the co-host with Alexander Armstrong of that, as well as having become the godfather of cosy crime novels. He's been phenomenally successful, so I'm sure people will think I'm envious. I am actually, when I make this point. But the film adaptation is the most appalling dreck.
Ooh.
I'm not anti-twee. I'm not anti-cosy crime.
You should be anti-twee. It's a blight on our nation's rich history of dark comedy.
But this film adaptation, I watched a couple of days ago. I was looking forward to it, sitting down with my Earl Grey and my slice of Victoria sponge, looking forward to 2 hours of absorbing crime mystery. I'm a sucker for Midsummer Murders. I love Marjorie Allingham, Ngaio Marsh, Dorothy L. Sayers, all of the great writers of the golden age of crime in the 20s and 30s. But I was hugely disappointed. You're right, there was an amazing cast. So Helen Mirren, Pierce Brosnan, Ben Kingsley and Celia Imrie. Yes, but not just them. David Tennant is in it. Richard E. Grant is in it. I'm tempted to say that never in the field of Netflix drama has so much talent been given so much money to achieve so little in 2 hours. Pierce Brosnan's accent, which veers from...
What accent is he trying to do in it?
He's supposed to be a Cockney trade union leader who's a West Ham fan. Makes Dick Van Dyke sound like a Millwall Supporters Club chair. I mean, it's unbelievable. But the worst thing about it is that it piles cliche upon cliche in a way which means that rather than familiarity, rather than that pleasing sense of horrific events occurring in a classically comforting traditional home counties surrounding, what you have is a series of implausible events with a cast of flimsy two-dimensional stereotypes which are scarcely sustained. But the worst thing of all is that in a film that is supposed to celebrate older people, and the contribution they can make, I don't want to give too much away, but actually by doing so I can put you off watching it. The climax of the film is in fact a celebration of assisted dying.
Oh, God.
So
the cast were interviewed and they mentioned assisted dying and they were all very pro it. But I think Helen Mirren managed to champion assisted dying in a kind of twee way, which is classic, because sometimes twee can be very sinister. Remember those Dignity and Dying adverts on the tube that had a woman in pyjamas dancing around because she'd been granted an assisted death. But Helen Mirren said, "Oh, well, you have to say goodbye in a very warm and happy way." And it's a bit like, well, that's great if you're like a wealthy person with full command of their faculties and no financial worries. But what about, the potential coercion, the very real fears? It's like, well, that doesn't matter because it's all going to be very warm and fluffy. Who cares about the detail? It's like Kim Leadbeater had given an interview.
Quite. And part of the appeal of crime drama and crime novels is that there is something ultimately moral about them, because in the end, evil is unmasked, and either patient detective work or virtue is rewarded. And they needn't be intellectually incredibly stretching, but in a Dorothy L. Sayers or Marjorie Allingham mystery, the bad end badly and the good happily. Here, well, it is the case that there is some villainy that is unmasked. The unfortunate thing is that the attempt to create ethical shades of grey at a certain point, because one of the killers is an exploited migrant, and another one of the killers is a female police officer.
Spoiler warning.
Yeah, who's seeking justice. It seems to me to be a departure from it. And
It sounds very serious as well. Like, one of the things I love Midsummer Murders too, and one of the things I just love about Midsummer Murders is that some of the outcomes and the reasons for people murdering are just completely preposterous. Like, my all-time favourite Midsummer Murders episode is one where it turns out that the murderer is she's descended from the vicar of a church in the 19th century who was murdered by the bell ringers in the 19th century. So she's decided to avenge him by killing the present day bell ringers. But when you try to make it all serious and lofty like this, perhaps that sort of undermines the coziness a little bit.
It can do, but in a way that recalls the plot of a Dorothy L. Sayers novel, actually, in which bell ringing, the Nine Tailors, is a critical part. I would argue that Midsummer Murders is lovely, but what we should be encouraging people to do is to go back to read the classics from the golden age of crime. And we know that Agatha Christie, of course, has an almost hegemonic status there. But I would argue that the trio of Ngaio Marsh, Marjorie Allingham, and Dorothy L. Sayers are the people to whom we should return. Theirs are careful, intricately plotted, very entertaining, and moral.
What about P.D. James? Do you rate
Oh,
her?
I love P.D. James.
I love P.D. James as well. Really creepy as well. Can be terrifying.
And what do you think of the particular virtues that P.D. James brings to the novel?
What I like is that they're quite firmly grounded in the present day. So in that sense, they are a bit of a departure from the sort of murder at the vicarage vibe. But they are, the clues, when you go back over them, the clues are extremely intelligently planted. She also always does give you enough information to solve the murder. There is nothing more annoying in a murder mystery than where I think it happens in some of the worst Agatha Christie. Not the best Agatha Christie, it's untoppable in my opinion. But when there's some bit of information about the character's past that is not sufficiently alluded to in the book. So there's a big reveal, which is actually this guy that you thought was this person is actually this long lost person, so-and-so, who we've mentioned, but there's no clue as to why it would be this person in particular.
The other thing I would say about the great P.D. James is that she was also, as the best crime writers are, and I hope I don't belabor at this point, a moralist of a particular kind. That doesn't mean to say that someone is sanctimonious, because you can enjoy the lurid and the gothic and the gory aspects of it. But one thing I'd love to know from our listeners and from Spectator readers overall are who are the best classic and contemporary crime novelists, because there's a crime writer who is writing now called Stuart McBride, who writes a series about a hard-bitten Scottish cop called Logan McRae in Aberdeen. I think they're actually better than Ian Rankin's Rebus novels. But I'd love to know what people think. And if it's the case that we're being a little bit unfair on Richard Osman and the cast of the Thursday Murder Club, I am sure that we will hear.
Some of the best modern murder mysteries I've read recently, I really like some of the Anthony Horowitz Magpie Murders, and there's a particularly good one called The Twist of the Knife, I think it's called. And Anthony Horowitz actually makes himself a character in these murder mysteries, which is fascinating. I think he is the narrator and the character is Anthony Horowitz, which is quite an interesting little twist. And I'm also a great devotee of the Shardlake series, which is set in Tudor England. I don't know if you've ever read any of those, Michael, but I think they're fantastic and you'd really enjoy them.
I haven't. And you're the third friend this week who's recommended them.
Third.
Third.
In a week.
Yes. So I shall, over this weekend, travel back in time to Tudor England.
Yes.
Travelling back in time, of course, is something that we love doing on Quite Right. We've looked at the summer. We've considered who the real winners of the summer's political battles have been. We've reflected on Keir Starmer's faulty reset. And we've also concluded that there is, in cosy crime, a rich seam of entertainment to be mined. But unfortunately, Richard Osman and the cast of the Thursday Murder Club, rather than hitting gold, I'm afraid have simply drawn dreck. But next week on Quite Right, Maddie and I will be back to look at the political week, to look at our cultural moment, and to deliver a dose of bracing reactionary common sense.